On October 26, 2025, after more than 16 years on death row, justice was finally served. Lance Colin Shockley was executed by lethal injection at the Missouri State Prison. In this video, we'll reveal what happened that night, what his last meal was, and It all began on the night of November 26, 2004, when 27-year-old Shockley decided to go for a drive with Jeffrey Biss, his sister-in-law's fiancé. The two were good friends who enjoyed spending time together, and that night, Jeffrey allowed Lance to drive his truck as they cruised through the roads of Van Buren, Missouri. Between laughter, drinks, and jokes, everything seemed peaceful, until everything changed and Shockley lost control of the vehicle and violently crashed into a ditch. When he regained consciousness, he saw Jeffrey dying inside the truck. In a panic, he walked to the nearest house, that of Ivy and Paul Napier, and told them there had been an accident, asking for help. Ivy noticed blood on Lance's hands, and Paul decided to accompany him back to the scene. When they arrived, they found Jeffrey Biss dead. Moments later, Shockley called his wife from the Napier's house, but before officers arrived, he fled the scene. When Missouri State Highway Patrol officers reached the crash site, they found beer cans and a bottle of tequila inside the truck, along with bloodstains on the outside of the vehicle. The case was assigned to Sergeant Carl Dwayne Graham Jr., a veteran investigator with more than 12 years of service. That same night, Graham went to Shockley's home to question him, but Shockley denied any involvement in the accident. He insisted he hadn't been with Jeffrey that night, that he had gone driving alone. But something didn't add up. When police interviewed Ivy and Paul Napier, both claimed they had only heard the crash, but hadn't seen anyone at the scene except for Jeffrey Biss's body. Their statements were confusing and contradictory, but Sergeant Graham suspected there was much more behind the story. 4 months after the crash in March 2005, the investigation took a decisive turn. Sergeant Graham visited Ivy Napier at her workplace and used a pressure tactic. He falsely told her that Lance Shockley had confessed to being involved in the accident. Surprised by this supposed confession, Ivy revealed that yes, she had indeed seen Shockley at her house the night of the crash, asking for help after the wreck. That same afternoon, Ivy called Shockley to ask why he had told police he was there. Shockley denied saying anything and assured her that he hadn't been questioned again, making it clear he had never admitted anything to Graham. Later, on March 19, 2005, Cindy Chilton, the mother of Jeffrey Biss's fiancé, informed Shockley that Sergeant Graham wanted to speak with her about the crash. Angry, Shockley replied that she didn't have to talk to Graham. That same day, somehow, he obtained the sergeant's home address. The next day, March 20, 2005, at around 12:20 p.m., Shockley borrowed his grandmother's red 1995 Pontiac Grand Am, distinguished by a bright yellow sticker on the trunk, and drove off. Between 1:45 p.m. and 4:15 p.m., several witnesses reported seeing a red Grand Am parked on the wrong side of the road just a few hundred yards from Sergeant Graham's residence. At 4:03 p.m., Sergeant Graham returned home, backed his patrol car into the driveway, and radioed in to report the end of his shift. As he stepped out of his vehicle, he was ambushed from behind. Shockley shot him with a high-powered rifle. The bullet pierced Graham's bulletproof vest, severing his spinal cord at the neck and instantly paralyzing him. As he fell, he suffered skull and rib fractures. While Graham was still alive on the ground, Shockley approached and fired 2 more shotgun blasts, one to the face and another to the shoulder before fleeing the scene. Neighbors, alarmed by the gunfire, called the police. Graham's body was discovered around 5:15 p.m. Shockley returned the Grand Am to his grandmother between 4:15 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. that same day. Investigators determined that the drive between his grandmother's home and the spot where the Grand Am had been seen took about 18 minutes, consistent with the timeline of events. That night, Missouri State Highway Patrol officers, accompanied by SWAT team members, went to Shockley's home to question him. He refused to cooperate, claiming he was busy. When investigators confronted him in person, he stood by his refusal and said he had spent the day working at home with his neighbor, Sylvan Duncan. The next day, questioned outside his workplace, he repeated the same alibi. He claimed he had visited several relatives, spent time at his grandmother's house, and watched from her living room as his neighbor moved some bushes. He also admitted he knew Sergeant Graham was investigating him for the truck accident, and without being prompted, stated that he didn't know where Graham lived. Before the interview ended, he warned them in a threatening tone. "Don't come back to my house without a search warrant, because if you do, there's going to be trouble and someone's going to get shot." Later that same day, Lance Shockley visited his grandmother and asked her to lie for him. He told her that if police questioned her, she should say he had been home all day when Sergeant Graham was killed. His grandmother refused, and Shockley reacted with anger. He threatened to kill her, placed a finger to her lips, and ordered in a low voice, "I was home all day." As part of the investigation, police arrested Shockley on March 23, 2005, for leaving the scene of the car accident that occurred on November 26, 2004, the same crash in which Jeffrey Biss had died. A few days later, on March 29th, the state formally charged him with leaving the scene of an accident, armed criminal action, and first-degree murder for the death of Sergeant Carl Graham, announcing its intention to seek the death penalty. Lance Shockley's trial began on March 22, 2009, in the Howell County Circuit Court after the proceedings were moved out of Carter County due to the case's notoriety. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Shockley had a clear motive to kill Sergeant Graham in order to stop the investigation that could send him to prison for the Biss accident. The defense, on the other hand, claimed there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime and that the state's case was built entirely on speculation. And indeed, there was no direct physical evidence. No blood, no fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitnesses, and no murder weapon recovered. The case rested solely on circumstantial ballistic evidence. Experts determined that the rifle bullet recovered from Sergeant Graham's body was a .22 to .24 caliber round, consistent with a .243 rifle. Similar bullet fragments were found on a property belonging to Shockley's uncle, which the state considered an incriminating coincidence. But even within the state's own forensic team, doubts emerged. One expert hired by the prosecution initially classified the ballistic findings as inconclusive, refusing to declare a definitive match. He later changed his statement under pressure and then retracted it once again sometime after. Despite the weakness of the case, on March 27, 2009, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lance Colin Shockley guilty of first-degree murder. However, during the sentencing phase, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. Some jurors voted for life imprisonment without parole, while others demanded the death penalty. Under Missouri law, when a jury fails to agree on punishment, the final decision rests with the judge. Thus, on May 22, 2009, Judge David Evans of the Carter County Court sentenced 32-year-old Lance Shockley to death. During his more than 16 years on death row, Shockley worked as a prison cobbler and embraced a deep religious faith. However, he never admitted guilt, maintaining until the end that he was innocent of Sergeant Graham's murder. Over the years, all of his appeals were denied. First by the Missouri Supreme Court, then by the Federal District Court, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, and finally by the United States Supreme Court. On October 13, 2025, one day before his execution, Governor Mike Cohn denied the clemency petition filed by his attorneys. After more than 16 years on death row, Lance Colin Shockley was executed on October 14, 2025 at 6 p.m. by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bon Terre, Missouri. He was 48 years old at the time of his death. It was the first execution carried out in Missouri in 2025, and the first under Governor Mike Coates' administration. At 6:13 p.m., the prison warden pronounced him dead. That day, Shockley woke up at 7 a.m. He showered, spoke with his spiritual advisors, and spent his final hours with his family and children who were allowed to visit him before the execution. For his last meal, he asked for something simple. In addition to the regular prison menu, he requested peanut butter, 3 packets of oatmeal, water, and 2 sports drinks. At 6 p.m., the curtains to the execution chamber opened. Shockley lay strapped to the gurney, dressed in a white shirt and covered with a white sheet up to his chest. His head rested on a pillow as he looked toward the witness area where several of his loved ones were seated. A woman among the witnesses appeared to speak to him from behind the soundproof glass. The two exchanged a few words. Shockley then nodded several times and murmured something that could not be heard. At 6:01 p.m., prison officials began administering the lethal drug cocktail. Witnesses observed as Shockley took a few deep breaths before resting his head back on the pillow. His breathing gradually slowed, then became shallow, and within 2 minutes it stopped completely. He showed no signs of struggle or pain. He simply faded away. The curtains were briefly closed, and when they reopened, his body lay still. The procedure was over. According to the official prison transcript, Lance Shockley's final words were unclear, but were recorded verbatim as, "So you have now, will see again your hearts, and one will your joy you." That same night, at the exact same hour, but in another state, another execution took place, that of former Baptist deacon Samuel Lee Smithers in Florida, convicted of murder.